The sun cast long shadows across the dusty streets of Delta, Colorado, as Tessa Brooks clutched the crumpled letter in her trembling hands, tears streaming down her face. The territorial judge's verdict was final. Her 4-year-old son, Timothy, would become a ward of the state, deemed better off in an orphanage than with his struggling mother who couldn't afford to feed him properly or provide adequate shelter since her husband's death in the silver mine collapse last winter. Delta in 1883 was unforgiving to widows with no family connections. At 24, Tessa had exhausted every option available to her. She'd taken in laundry, cleaned houses for the wealthy, even sold her wedding ring, but the drought had made work scarce, and prices for basic necessities had soared. The judge had given her 3 days to say goodbye before the territorial officers would come to collect Timothy and take him to the orphanage in Denver. Tessa stumbled back to her small, dilapidated cabin on the outskirts of town, the letter falling from her grasp as she collapsed onto the rough wooden porch steps. This small patch of land and the ramshackle structure upon it were all she had left of her husband's dreams, and now even her son would be taken. "Mama, why are you crying?" Timothy's small voice broke through her sobs as he peeked around the cabin door, his dark curls framing a face that looked so much like his father's it made her heart ache. "It's nothing, sweetheart," she lied, quickly wiping her tears. "Just the dust in my eyes. Come inside now, let's get supper ready." Supper was meager, the last of the beans and a small portion of cornbread, barely enough to quiet Timothy's hunger. As she tucked him into bed that night, Tessa felt desperation clawing at her insides. There had to be something, anything she could do to keep her boy. The next morning dawned with Tessa having barely slept. She dressed Timothy in his cleanest clothes and headed into town, determined to beg for work, for charity, for mercy, anything that would convince the judge to reconsider. Delta's Main Street was busy with the usual morning activity. Merchants opened their shops, ranch hands rode in for supplies, and the smell of fresh bread wafted from the bakery. Tessa gripped Timothy's hand tightly as they approached the general store, where she hoped to speak with Mr. Peterson about extending her credit once more. She was so focused on rehearsing her plea that she didn't notice the commotion until they were right upon it. A cluster of townspeople had gathered around a tall man whose broad-shouldered silhouette stood out against the morning sun. His worn leather vest and the distinctive curve of a Colt revolver at his hip marked him immediately as one of the cowboys from the Double Diamond Ranch, the largest cattle operation in the county. "That's Jake Jackson," whispered a woman beside Tessa. "Just brought in 3 rustlers all by himself. They say he's the best tracker in the territory." Tessa barely spared the man a glance. Cowboys and their exploits meant nothing to her current troubles. She tried to skirt around the crowd, but Timothy pulled at her hand, fascinated by the man's tall hat and jingling spurs. "Mama, look." "A real cowboy," he exclaimed, loud enough that several heads turned, including that of Jake Jackson himself. Jake's eyes, a startling blue against his sun-darkened face, met Tessa's briefly before dropping to the boy at her side. A hint of a smile touched his lips as he nodded politely toward Timothy, then turned back to finish his business with the sheriff. Tessa hurried on, pulling Timothy toward the general store. Once inside, her rehearsed speech fell apart under Mr. Peterson's sympathetic but firm refusal. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Brooks, but you're already owing more than you can pay," he said quietly, glancing around to ensure no other customers overheard. "Times are hard for everyone. I can't extend any more credit." "Please," Tessa whispered, desperation evident in her voice. "Just enough to last the week. I'll take any work scrubbing floors, washing windows, anything." Mr. Peterson shook his head. I wish I could help, but I've got my own family to feed. Defeated, Tessa left the store with Timothy in tow. They visited 3 more businesses with the same results before stopping at the town well for a drink. Timothy's small face was pinched with hunger, and Tessa felt the familiar ache of failure as a mother. "Mrs. Brooks." A deep voice startled her, and she turned to find Jake Jackson standing behind them, his hat now in his hands. "I couldn't help overhearing at the general store. Seems like you're in a tough spot." Tessa straightened her spine, pride flaring despite her circumstances. "We'll manage, Mr. Jackson." "Thank you for your concern." "Jake, please," he corrected, his eyes kind as he crouched down to Timothy's level. "And who might this young man be?" "I'm Timothy," the boy answered eagerly. "I'm 4 years old." 4. "My, that's practically grown," Jake said seriously, earning a delighted giggle from Timothy. He stood back up, addressing Tessa again. "Mrs. Brooks, I don't mean to pry, but word travels fast in a town this size. I heard about the judge's decision." Tessa's face burned with shame. "Then you know they're taking my son because I'm poor, not because I'm a bad mother." "I never thought otherwise," Jake replied, his voice gentle. "Which is why I'd like to offer a solution if you'd hear me out." Tessa looked at him suspiciously. She'd had her fill of men with solutions that came with unacceptable conditions. Jake seemed to read her thoughts. "It's nothing improper, madam. I own a small spread just outside town split off from the Double Diamond when old man Daniels retired last year. It's good land with a solid house that's sitting empty except for me. I'm in need of a housekeeper, and the position comes with room and board for you and your boy." "A housekeeper," Tessa repeated, uncertainty in her voice. "Yes, madam. Cooking, cleaning, mending, whatever needs doing. I'm away working cattle most days, and when I do come home, I'm afraid I've let the place go somewhat. The pay wouldn't be much at first, but it would be enough to show the judge you can provide for your son." Tessa considered his offer. It sounded too good to be true, and in her experience such offers usually were. "Why would you help strangers this way, Mr. Jackson?" Jake shifted uncomfortably. "I was an orphan myself, Mrs. Brooks. Spent 3 years in a Denver home before I ran away at 12. No child should go through that if there's another way." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, but Tessa had learned caution the hard way. The judge wouldn't consider it sufficient. A single woman living at a bachelor's ranch would cause talk, and that would only strengthen his case against me. Jake was quiet for a moment, his eyes thoughtful as he studied her face. "There is another option," he said finally, his voice lower, "though I hesitate to suggest it." "What option?" Tessa asked, wary but desperate enough to listen. "Marriage," Jake said simply. "A marriage of convenience, to be clear. You'd have my name, my protection, and my promise to treat your boy as my own. The judge couldn't argue with that." Tessa stared at him, momentarily speechless. "You can't be serious. We don't even know each other." "I know enough," Jake replied steadily. "I know you're a devoted mother who's fallen on hard times. I know you're proud and hardworking, and I know I have the means to help if you'll let me. Why would you marry a complete stranger? There must be plenty of young women who'd gladly have you without such desperate circumstances." Jake's smile was rueful. "I've been on my own a long time, Mrs. Brooks. Ranch work doesn't leave much time for courting, and I've never been one for town socials. I'm 32 years old and tired of coming home to an empty house. Having a family, even one that starts as an arrangement, seems a fair trade for my help." Timothy tugged at Tessa's skirt, oblivious to the weight of the conversation happening above his head. "Mama, I'm hungry." The simple statement hit Tessa like a physical blow. Her son was hungry, and tomorrow would be no different. The day after that, strangers would take him away. "The territorial officers come tomorrow," she said quietly. Jake nodded. Then we don't have much time. We could be married today if you're willing. Judge Parker is in his office until noon. Today. Tessa felt lightheaded at the speed of events. It would have to be today to stop them taking Timothy, Jake confirmed. I know it's sudden, and I know I'm asking for an enormous leap of faith. But I promise you, on my honor, that I'll be a good husband to you and a good father to your boy. If, after a reasonable time, you find you can't abide the arrangement, I'll ensure you and Timothy are set up somewhere safe, with means to support yourselves. Tessa looked down at her son, then back at the tall cowboy whose eyes held nothing but sincerity. What choice did she really have? A loveless marriage to a decent man seemed a small price to pay to keep Timothy with her. "All right, Mr. Jackson," she said at last. "I accept your proposal." Relief washed over Jake's face. "Thank you, Mrs. Brooks. I promise you won't regret this." 2 hours later, Tessa stood in Judge Parker's office in a borrowed dress, speaking vows to a man she barely knew. The judge, though surprised by the sudden union, seemed pleased with the solution to what he had viewed as an unfortunate but necessary removal of the child. "Well then," he said, closing his ledger after recording the marriage, "I see no reason to proceed with tomorrow's scheduled removal. The boy clearly has a stable home now." He looked pointedly at Jake. "I trust you understand the responsibility you're taking on, Mr. Jackson." "I do, Your Honor," Jake replied firmly, his hand gentle on Timothy's shoulder. "This boy is now my son in every way that matters." Timothy looked up at Jake with curiosity rather than fear, which Tessa took as a good sign. Children often sensed things adults missed, and her son seemed to trust the tall cowboy instinctively. After signing the necessary papers, they stepped out into the bright Colorado sunshine as husband and wife. Tessa felt dazed, the gold band Jake had hurriedly purchased from the jeweler heavy on her finger. "I have a wagon at the livery," Jake said, breaking the awkward silence. "We can collect your belongings and be home before dark." Home. The word sounded foreign to Tessa now. What would this new home be like? And what had she agreed to, really? "Timothy and I don't have much," she said. "It won't take long to pack," Jake nodded, offering his arm hesitantly. After a moment's pause, Tessa took it, allowing him to guide them toward the livery stable. His solid presence beside her was both reassuring and terrifying. This man was now her husband, and she knew almost nothing about him. As they walked, Jake spoke quietly. "I meant what I said, Tessa. This is a real marriage as far as I'm concerned, but I won't rush you. You'll have your own room until you decide otherwise, if ever. My only request is that we present ourselves as a true family to the town and to Timothy." Tessa nodded, grateful for his understanding. "Thank you, Jake. I don't know what else to say." "You don't need to say anything," he replied. "Just give this a chance to work." At the livery, Jake's wagon proved to be well maintained, pulled by a matched pair of strong bay horses. He helped Tessa and Timothy onto the seat before climbing up himself and setting off toward her cabin. "My place is about 5 miles east of town," he explained as they drove. "It's not fancy, but the house is solid, with 3 bedrooms and a good kitchen. There's a small garden plot that hasn't been tended since I bought the place. Perhaps you might enjoy working it." "I would," Tessa said, surprised by the genuine interest in his voice. "I've always wanted a proper garden." The conversation flowed more easily as they drove, with Jake asking questions about Timothy's likes and dislikes, and sharing bits of information about the ranch. By the time they reached Tessa's cabin, some of her initial terror had subsided. Jake Jackson might be a stranger, but he seemed a decent man who genuinely wanted to help. Packing took less time than expected. Tessa's possessions amounted to clothing, a few kitchen items, her husband's Bible, and a small trunk of Timothy's toys and books. Jake loaded everything carefully into the wagon, treating each item with respect. As they drove away from the cabin that had been her home for 5 years, Tessa felt a curious mixture of sadness and hope. Behind her lay the memories of her first marriage, both the joy and the struggle. Ahead lay an unknown future with a man she had married out of desperation. "Are you all right?" Jake asked softly, noticing her silence. "Yes," Tessa replied, surprising herself with the truth of it. "I think I am." Timothy had fallen asleep between them, his small head resting against Jake's arm. The sight gave Tessa an unexpected pang of emotion. Her son needed a father, and while no one could replace the man she'd lost, perhaps Jake could be the father Timothy deserved. The road wound through rolling grasslands dotted with cattle, eventually turning onto a smaller trail that led to a neat homestead nestled against a backdrop of cottonwood trees. The house was larger than Tessa had expected, a well-built two-story structure with a wide front porch and glass windows that caught the late afternoon sun. "This is your home?" Tessa couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. Jake nodded, a hint of pride in his expression. "I built most of it myself over the past year. I always figured I'd have a family someday, so I made it big enough for one." As they drew closer, Tessa could see flower beds currently overgrown but once carefully planned bordering the front path. A large barn stood to one side, with corrals and a small bunkhouse beyond. It was a proper ranch, not the humble cabin she'd expected. "You said you split off from the Double Diamond," Tessa said, trying to reconcile this substantial property with the modest way Jake had described it. "That's right. Mr. Daniels was getting on in years and didn't have any children. I started working for him when I was 15, worked my way up to foreman. When he decided to retire to Denver, he offered to sell me this portion of the land, said I'd earned it." Jake smiled at the memory. "I've added to it some since then. It's a good living, even in hard times." As the wagon pulled up to the house, the front door opened and an older Mexican woman stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mrs. Ramirez," Jake called in greeting. "I've brought some company." The woman raised her eyebrows in obvious surprise as she took in Tessa and the sleeping Timothy. "This is my wife, Tessa, and our son, Timothy," Jake continued, the words sounding strange but not unpleasant to Tessa's ears. "Tessa, this is Mrs. Alina Ramirez. She comes in 3 days a week to cook and help with the cleaning." "Your wife?" Mrs. Ramirez repeated, her eyes wide. "Dios mío, when did this happen?" "Today," Jake replied simply, jumping down from the wagon and coming around to help Tessa. It was rather sudden, but sometimes life's best blessings come unexpectedly. Mrs. Ramirez crossed herself, muttering something in Spanish before breaking into a warm smile. "Well then, welcome to your home, Mrs. Jackson." "The saints be praised. I was beginning to think this one would never find a woman to put up with him." Jake gently lifted the still sleeping Timothy from the wagon. "I'll put him in the bedroom next to ours," he told Tessa. "Mrs. Ramirez can show you around while I unload your things." Tessa followed the housekeeper into a home far more comfortable than she had dared to hope for. The main floor consisted of a large kitchen with a proper cookstove, a dining room with a table that could seat 8, and a comfortable sitting room with bookshelves lining one wall. Upstairs were 4 bedrooms, the master with its own small adjoining room, a room clearly prepared for a child with a small bed and chest of drawers, and 2 additional bedrooms currently used for storage. "He built all this himself?" Tessa asked as Mrs. Ramirez showed her the kitchen pantry, well stocked with staples. "With some help from the ranch hands, yes," the older woman replied. "Mr. Jake has been preparing this house for a family for 2 years now. I told him he needed to go find a wife instead of just building rooms for one, but he always said the right woman would come along when God intended." She gave Tessa an appraising look. I guess he was right. Tessa felt a blush creep into her cheeks. If only Mrs. Ramirez knew the truth of their hasty arrangement. "I've made a beef stew for supper," Mrs. Ramirez continued, seemingly oblivious to Tessa's discomfort. "There's fresh bread cooling and an apple pie for dessert. Will that be suitable for your first meal in your new home?" "More than suitable," Tessa assured her, thinking of the meager meals she and Timothy had grown accustomed to. "It sounds wonderful." Mrs. Ramirez nodded in satisfaction. "Good. I'll finish up here and be on my way. My son will come by to fetch me soon." She hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "Mr. Jake is a good man, Senora. He deserves happiness." Before Tessa could respond, Jake appeared in the doorway, having quietly deposited her trunk and boxes in the appropriate rooms. "Timothy's still sleeping," he reported. "I figured he could use the rest after all the excitement." "Thank you," Tessa said, suddenly very aware that they were now alone in this house, their house as husband and wife. Jake seemed to sense her unease. "I need to check on the livestock before dark," he said. "Make yourself at home. Supper should be ready whenever you and Timothy are hungry." With that, he grabbed his hat and headed out the back door, giving Tessa space to breathe and adjust to her new surroundings. Left alone in the kitchen, Tessa slowly explored her new domain. The pantry was indeed well stocked, the kitchen equipment of good quality. Through the window, she could see a vegetable garden that, while currently untended, had good soil and a nearby well for watering. Beyond that stretched fenced pastures where cattle grazed, and in the distance, the purple shadows of mountains against the evening sky. It was beautiful, far more than she deserved for the price of a desperate marriage. Guilt mingled with relief as she thought of how close she had come to losing Timothy, and how this stranger's generosity had saved them both. A small sound from upstairs drew her attention. Timothy was awake. Taking a deep breath, Tessa prepared to explain to her son that they had a new home now and a new father. How much should she tell him? At 4, he wouldn't understand the concept of a marriage of convenience, nor should he. To Timothy, Jake would simply be his new pa and this beautiful ranch his new home. As she climbed the stairs, Tessa resolved to make this work, for Timothy's sake and for Jake's. The man had offered them salvation when they needed it most. The least she could do was try to be a good wife and partner to him, even if love wasn't part of their bargain. Timothy was sitting up in bed, looking around the unfamiliar room with wide eyes when Tessa entered. "Mama, where are we?" he asked, clutching his small stuffed horse, the one toy she'd managed to keep for him through their hardest times. Tessa sat on the edge of the bed, smoothing his dark curls. "This is our new home, sweetheart. Remember the nice man from town, Mr. Jackson?" Timothy nodded, his expression brightening. "The cowboy with the big hat. That's right," Tessa smiled. "His name is Jake, and he's going to be your new pa. He asked Mama to marry him today, and I said yes. We're going to live here now on his ranch." Timothy's eyes grew even wider. "A real ranch, with horses and cows?" "Yes, a real ranch with horses and cows. And you'll have your own room and plenty to eat, and Jake, your new pa, will teach you all sorts of things." Timothy considered this information seriously. "Is he nice? Will he read me stories like Pa used to?" Tessa felt her throat tighten. "I think he's very nice, and I'm sure he'll read you stories if you ask him. He wants us to be happy here, Timothy. This is our chance for a better life. Can I see the horses?" Timothy asked, evidently satisfied with her answer and already moving on to more exciting possibilities. "Tomorrow," Tessa promised. "It's almost supper time now. Are you hungry?" Timothy nodded eagerly, and Tessa helped him wash his hands and face before they headed downstairs. As they reached the bottom step, the back door opened and Jake entered, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. "Well, look who's awake," he said, smiling at Timothy. "Did you have a good nap, partner?" Timothy nodded, regarding Jake with curiosity but not fear. "Mama says you're my new pa." Jake crouched down to Timothy's level, his expression serious but kind. "That's right, if that's okay with you. I promise to be a good pa, though I might need some help learning how. Do you think you could teach me?" Timothy considered this question with all the gravity a 4-year-old could muster. "I guess so. Do you know how to catch frogs?" Jake chuckled. "I sure do, and I can teach you how to ride a horse and rope a calf too when you're a bit bigger." "Really?" Timothy's eyes lit up, and in that moment, Tessa knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, her son would be all right. "Really," Jake confirmed, standing back up. "But first, I think Mrs. Ramirez left us a mighty fine supper. Are you hungry, cowboy? Starving?" Timothy declared, any hesitation forgotten in the promise of food and horses. As they moved into the dining room, Tessa was struck by how natural Jake was with Timothy, and how easily her son responded to him. There was none of the awkwardness she had feared, just a man who seemed genuinely pleased to have a child in his home. The meal was more abundant than any Tessa had seen in months. Thick beef stew with vegetables and dumplings, fresh bread with butter, and apple pie still warm from the oven. Timothy ate with enthusiasm, getting almost as much on his face as in his mouth, while Jake shared stories about the ranch and its animals, carefully gauging which tales would interest a 4-year-old boy. "We've got a new calf in the barn," Jake mentioned as they finished dessert. "Born just 3 days ago. Maybe tomorrow you and your mama would like to come see him. Can we, Mama?" Timothy pleaded, his face alight with excitement. "Of course," Tessa agreed, touched by Jake's efforts to include them in his life. "We'd like that very much." After supper, Jake insisted on cleaning up while Tessa got Timothy ready for bed. The boy was tired despite his nap, overwhelmed by the day's changes and excitement. As she tucked him into his new bed, larger and more comfortable than the pallet he'd slept on in their cabin, Timothy asked the question she'd been dreading. "Mama, do we have to go away now? The man in the big building said I had to go away because we didn't have enough money." Tessa's heart clenched at the memory of that terrible moment when the judge had pronounced his verdict. "No, sweetheart, you don't have to go away. That's why Mama married Jake. He's going to take care of us both, and we'll live here in this nice house from now on." Timothy yawned, his eyes already closing. "I like Jake," he murmured sleepily. "He smells like horses." Tessa smiled, leaning down to kiss his forehead. "Good night, my brave boy, I love you." "Love you too, Mama," Timothy whispered, already drifting off. Tessa remained by his side until his breathing deepened into sleep, then quietly made her way back downstairs. She found Jake in the sitting room, a ledger open on his lap and a lamp burning at his elbow. "Is he settled?" Jake asked, closing the book as she entered. Yes, he was exhausted. Tessa sat in the chair opposite, unsure what was expected of her now. "He seems to like you." Jake smiled, the expression softening his weathered features. "He's a good boy. You've done a fine job with him, especially under difficult circumstances." "Thank you." Tessa hesitated, then added, "I want you to know how grateful I am for what you've done. I know this isn't a conventional marriage, but I promise to be a good wife to you, Jake. I'll keep your house and cook your meals," and Jake held up a hand, stopping her. "Tessa, you don't need to convince me of your worth. I didn't marry you to get a housekeeper. Mrs. Ramirez does just fine with that. I married you because it was the right thing to do and because I've been alone too long." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I know you're still grieving your husband, and I respect that. I meant what I said about giving you time and space. This marriage can be whatever we decide to make it." "I don't know what to say," Tessa admitted, moved by his understanding. "You don't need to say anything tonight," Jake replied gently. "It's been a long day full of changes. Why don't you get some rest? Your room is the one next to Timothy's. I've moved my things to the room across the hall." Tessa nodded, grateful for his consideration. "Good night then, Jake. And thank you again." "Good night, Tessa," he said softly. "Welcome home." As she climbed the stairs to her new bedroom, Tessa felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. For the first time in months, she didn't have to worry about where Timothy's next meal would come from, or whether they'd have a roof over their heads come winter. Whatever complications this unusual marriage might bring, the immediate crisis was over. Her son was safe, and so was she. The bedroom Jake had prepared for her was simple but comfortable, with a large bed covered in a colorful quilt, a dresser with a mirror, and curtains at the windows that matched the bedspread. Someone, Mrs. Ramirez, presumably had unpacked her few clothes and arranged them neatly in the dresser. On the nightstand sat a small vase with wildflowers, freshly picked. The thoughtful gesture brought unexpected tears to Tessa's eyes. It had been so long since anyone had considered her comfort or happiness. Changing into her nightgown, Tessa slid beneath the quilt, marveling at the softness of the mattress after months of sleeping on a thin pallet. Through the open window came the night sounds of the ranch crickets chirping, the occasional lowing of cattle, and the gentle rustle of cottonwood leaves in the evening breeze. It was peaceful, this place that was now her home. As Tessa drifted toward sleep, she found herself hoping that this marriage of convenience might, in time, become something more. Jake Jackson was a good man who deserved happiness, and though Tessa had never imagined marrying again after losing her first husband, perhaps fate had other plans. The first rays of dawn were filtering through the curtains when Tessa awoke, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back: the judge's letter, Jake's proposal, the hasty wedding, and their arrival at the ranch. She was Tessa Jackson now, wife to a man she barely knew. The house was quiet as she dressed and made her way downstairs. From the kitchen window, she could see Jake already at work in the corral, leading a young horse in circles on a long rope. His movements were patient and confident, his attention fully focused on the animal. Tessa set about preparing breakfast, finding everything she needed in the well-stocked pantry and learning the quirks of the cookstove. By the time Timothy came stumbling downstairs, still sleep-rumpled and yawning, she had biscuits in the oven and bacon frying in the pan. "Good morning, sleepyhead," she greeted him, bending to kiss his cheek. "Did you sleep well in your new bed?" Timothy nodded, climbing onto a chair to peer out the window. "Where's Jake, I mean?" "Pa," the correction sent a pang through Tessa's heart, but she smiled encouragingly. "He's outside working with the horses. He'll be in for breakfast soon." "Can I go watch?" Timothy asked eagerly. "After breakfast," Tessa promised. "First, you need to wash up and eat." By the time Jake came in, stomping dust from his boots at the back door, breakfast was on the table and Timothy was practically vibrating with excitement. "Something smells mighty good," Jake said appreciatively, washing his hands at the sink. "I'm not used to coming in to breakfast already made. Usually I just grab whatever's quickest." "I hope you like biscuits and bacon," Tessa said, suddenly uncertain. "I should have asked what you prefer for breakfast." "I like anything I don't have to cook myself," Jake assured her with a smile. "This looks perfect." They settled around the table, and after a moment's awkward pause, Jake bowed his head. "Lord, thank you for this food and for bringing Tessa and Timothy into my life. Bless this home and this family. Amen." The simple prayer touched Tessa deeply. Jake hadn't just married her to save Timothy from the orphanage. He was genuinely trying to build a family. Breakfast conversation flowed more easily than Tessa had expected, with Timothy peppering Jake with questions about the ranch and its animals. Jake answered each one patiently, occasionally catching Tessa's eye with a smile that made her heart flutter unexpectedly. "Can I see the horses now?" Timothy asked as soon as he'd cleaned his plate. "You sure can," Jake replied, pushing back from the table. "And that new calf I told you about. Would you like to come too, Tessa?" "I'd like that," she said. "Let me just clean up here first." "Leave it," Jake suggested. "We can do it together when we come back in. I'd like to show you both around the place while it's still cool out." The tour of the ranch was comprehensive. From the barn with its 6 stalls housing Jake's working horses, to the chicken coop where a dozen hens scratched and pecked, to the small orchard of apple and cherry trees behind the house. Timothy was enchanted by the new calf, a wobbly-legged creature with big eyes and a wet nose that snuffled curiously at his outstretched hand. "His mama died birthing him," Jake explained quietly to Tessa as Timothy stroked the calf's soft head. "I've been bottle feeding him every few hours." "That's a lot of work," Tessa observed. Jake shrugged. "Worth it, though. He's a fighter, this little one." There was genuine affection in his voice as he watched the calf nuzzle against Timothy's small hand. The rest of the morning was spent learning the rhythms of the ranch. Jake showed Tessa the garden plot he'd mentioned, already turned over and ready for planting. "Mrs. Ramirez's husband helps with the heavy work around here when needed," he explained. "He turned the soil last week, said it was a shame to let good ground go to waste." "It's perfect," Tessa said, already imagining rows of vegetables that would feed them through the winter. "I've always wanted a proper garden. At our cabin, the soil was too rocky for much besides potatoes." "Whatever you need for it, just let me know," Jake offered. "Seeds, tools, fencing, anything at all." The genuine interest in his voice warmed Tessa. This wasn't just politeness. He really wanted her to make this place her own. As they walked back toward the house, Timothy running ahead to investigate a butterfly, Jake cleared his throat. "I've been thinking about your situation, Tessa, about why the judge was going to take Timothy." Tessa tensed, the familiar shame washing over her. "Because I couldn't provide for him properly." "Because you didn't have enough money," Jake corrected gently. "Not because you weren't a good mother." He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. "This is yours now. I've set up an account for you at the Delta Bank. It's not a fortune, but it should be enough that you never have to worry about basic necessities again." Tessa stared at the envelope, then at Jake, stunned by his generosity. "I can't accept this." "You can and you will," Jake said firmly. "You're my wife now, Tessa. What's mine is yours. I won't have you feeling like a charity case in your own home." Tears pricked at Tessa's eyes. "You've already done so much. I've done what any decent man would do," Jake replied. "And I'd appreciate it if you'd let me do this too, for my own peace of mind if nothing else." Slowly, Tessa accepted the envelope. "Thank you, Jake. I don't know how I'll ever repay you for all this." "You don't need to repay me. Just be patient with me as I figure out how to be a husband and father." His smile was self-deprecating. "I'm bound to make mistakes." "We both will," Tessa admitted. "This isn't exactly how I imagined marriage would be." "No," Jake agreed, "but maybe that's not a bad thing. We start with eyes wide open, no illusions to shatter." The wisdom in his words struck Tessa forcefully. Her first marriage had begun with romantic notions that hadn't survived the harsh realities of frontier life. Perhaps beginning with practicality and building toward affection was the wiser course. The days that followed settled into a comfortable routine. Jake worked the ranch with the help of 2 hired hands who lived in the bunkhouse, while Tessa took charge of the household and began planting her garden. Timothy thrived in the open spaces of the ranch. following Jake like a shadow whenever the man was home and soaking up knowledge about animals and ranch life like a sponge. Mrs. Ramirez continued to come 3 days a week, but now worked alongside Tessa rather than alone. The older woman taught Tessa to make tortillas and spicy stews, shared gossip about the families in Delta, and gently prodded for details about her whirlwind courtship with Jake. It was very sudden, Tessa admitted when pressed, but sometimes you just know when something is right. Mrs. Ramirez nodded sagely. The heart knows what the head cannot understand, and Mr. Jake, he has been waiting for someone like you for a long time. Someone like me, Tessa echoed, curious despite herself. Someone strong enough to stand beside him, not behind him, Mrs. Ramirez explained. Many women in town have tried to catch his eye, but he was not interested in a pretty face only. He wanted a partner. The idea that Jake might have specifically chosen her, rather than simply responded to her desperate situation, was both flattering and unsettling. Tessa had assumed their marriage was purely one of convenience for him, a ready-made family without the trouble of courtship. But what if there was more to it? She watched him more closely after that conversation, noting the way he interacted with Timothy, always patient and encouraging, never raising his voice even when tired or frustrated. She noticed how he asked her opinion on ranch matters, genuinely interested in her perspective. And she became aware of how carefully he maintained the boundaries he'd established, never encroaching on her space or privacy. Though they lived as husband and wife in all other respects, 3 weeks into their marriage, Tessa decided it was time for a proper conversation. After Timothy was tucked in bed, she found Jake in the sitting room with his ledgers, as had become his custom in the evenings. "Jake," she began, settling into the chair opposite his, "I think we should talk about our arrangement." Jake closed his book, giving her his full attention. "What about it?" Tessa took a deep breath. "When we married, you said this could be a real marriage if I wanted it to be. I've been thinking about that." Jake's expression remained carefully neutral, though his knuckles whitened slightly where they gripped the ledger. "And what have you decided?" "I've decided that you're a good man, Jake Jackson, a better man than I had any right to expect when I agreed to marry you." Tessa met his eyes directly. "I'd like to try being a real wife to you if the offer still stands." The surprise and hope that flashed across Jake's face was answer enough, but his words confirmed it. "The offer still stands, Tessa. It always will. But are you sure? I don't want you to feel obligated because of what I've done for you and Timothy." "I don't feel obligated," Tessa assured him. "I feel grateful, yes, but that's not why I'm suggesting this. I've come to respect you, Jake. I enjoy your company, and I think in time there could be real affection between us." "There already is on my part," Jake admitted quietly. "I've admired you from the first day, Tessa. Your courage, your devotion to your son, your determination to make the best of difficult circumstances. I couldn't have asked for a better wife, even if we'd courted properly for years." His words sent a warm flush through Tessa. "Then perhaps we could start courting now, even though we're already married. Get to know each other properly." Jake smiled, the expression lighting his whole face. "I'd like that very much." And so began a peculiar courtship between two people already bound by matrimony. Jake brought Tessa wildflowers from the prairie and took her on picnics by the creek that ran through the property. Tessa learned to make his favorite desserts and sat with him in the evenings, sharing stories of their lives before they met. They discovered shared interests, a love of reading, a preference for sunrise over sunset, a taste for peppermint candy, and differences that complemented rather than conflicted. Timothy flourished under their combined care, growing stronger and more confident with each passing day. He called Jake Pa without hesitation now, and the man earned the title with every patient lesson, every bedtime story, every game of catch in the yard. 6 weeks after their wedding, Jake suggested they ride into town together for supplies and to attend the summer festival that Delta held annually. Tessa agreed eagerly, looking forward to showing Timothy the festivities and to being seen publicly as Jake's wife for the first time since their hasty ceremony. The day of the festival dawned clear and warm. Tessa dressed carefully in her best dress, a new one Jake had insisted on ordering from the catalog when he noticed how few clothes she possessed. It was a pretty blue cotton with white trim, modestly cut but far more fashionable than anything she'd owned before. "You look beautiful," Jake said when she came downstairs, his sincere admiration evident in his eyes. Tessa blushed, pleased by his reaction. "Thank you. You look quite handsome yourself." And he did in his clean black trousers and white shirt, his usually unruly hair tamed with water and a comb. They drove into town in the wagon, Timothy bouncing excitedly between them on the seat. Delta's main street was decorated with bunting and flags, and the town square had been transformed with booths selling food, crafts, and games. A band played from a makeshift stage, and children darted everywhere, sticky with candy and excitement. "Jake Jackson," a voice called as they secured the wagon at the hitching post. A burly man with an impressive mustache strode toward them, hand extended. "Didn't expect to see you in town today. Thought you'd be too busy with that new breeding stock you bought." "Hello, Frank," Jake replied, shaking the man's hand. "Couldn't miss the festival. Frank, this is my wife, Tessa, and our son, Timothy. Tessa, this is Frank Miller, owns the mercantile." Frank's eyebrows shot up. "Wife? Well, I'll be. The rumors are true then. Congratulations." He turned to Tessa with a broad smile. "Mrs. Jackson, it's a pleasure. You've managed what half the single ladies in the county couldn't, getting this confirmed bachelor to the altar." Tessa smiled, slipping her hand into Jake's. "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Miller. Jake has told me about your fine store. I'm looking forward to seeing it." "Come by any time," Frank invited. "We've just got in some new fabrics I think you'd like." He winked at Jake. "Better watch your wallet, Jackson. Your missus has expensive taste." "Whatever she wants," Jake replied easily, his eyes warm as he looked at Tessa. "She deserves the best." Frank chuckled, clearly amused by the besotted expression on Jake's face. "Well, I'll leave you folks to enjoy the festival. Stop by the store later if you've a mind to. Martha would love to meet your wife." As Frank moved off, Tessa squeezed Jake's hand gratefully. "Thank you for that." Jake looked puzzled. "For what?" "For not explaining that we had a rushed wedding because of Timothy. For making it sound like a normal courtship. It's nobody's business why we got married," Jake said firmly. "All they need to know is that you're my wife and I'm proud to have you on my arm." The rest of the day passed in a blur of introductions and activities. Jake seemed to know everyone in Delta, and everyone wanted to meet his new wife and son. Some clearly knew the circumstances of their hasty union. Judge Parker's clerk had a particularly knowing look, but most simply welcomed Tessa to the community and cooed over Timothy, who basked in the attention. They ate roasted corn and barbecued beef, watched Timothy play games with other children his age, and applauded the local talents performing on the stage. Jake won a stuffed bear for Timothy at the shooting gallery, impressing Tessa with his marksmanship. "You're quite the shot," she commented as they wandered through the festival. Jake shrugged modestly. "Had to be growing up. Hunting meant eating." It was one of the rare references he made to his childhood, which Tessa gathered had been difficult. She squeezed his hand encouragingly. "Tell me about it sometime," Jake nodded, his expression softening. "I will. Not all of it's pleasant, but it made me who I am." "And I like who you are," Tessa said simply. The honesty in her voice seemed to touch Jake deeply. He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. Tessa, whatever he had been about to say was interrupted by a commotion nearby. A group of men had gathered around two fighters, shouting encouragement as the men exchanged blows. The crowd jostled, pushing one man backward into Tessa, who stumbled and would have fallen if Jake hadn't caught her. "Easy there," Jake said sharply to the man, steadying Tessa with a protective arm. "Watch where you're going." The man turned, swaying slightly, clearly drunk despite the early hour. His bleary eyes focused on Tessa, then widened in recognition. "Well, if it ain't the widow Brooks," he slurred. "Heard you found yourself a rich husband. Lucky for you, huh? Poor as dirt one minute, living high the next." Tessa felt Jake tense beside her, but she squeezed his arm in warning. "Hello, Mr. Collins. Yes, I've been very fortunate. I hope you're enjoying the festival." The man Collins sneered. "Fortune ain't the word for it. Some women just know how to land on their feet, don't they?" One husband in the ground and another one lined up right quick. Jake stepped forward, his expression dangerous. "You're drunk, Collins. I suggest you move along before you say something you'll regret." Collins didn't seem to register the threat in Jake's voice. "What's the matter, Jackson?" "Don't like hearing how your wife was so desperate she'd marry the first man who offered. Ask around town, everyone knows she only married you to keep the judge from taking her brat." Jake's fist connected with Collins's jaw before Tessa could blink. The man went down hard, landing in the dust with a shocked expression. "Jake," Tessa gasped, pulling at his arm as he stood over the fallen man. "Get up," Jake said coldly to Collins. "Get up and apologize to my wife." Collins scrambled backward, one hand clutching his jaw. "You're crazy, Jackson." "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking." "Get up," Jake repeated, his voice deadly quiet now. "Apologize to Mrs. Jackson or I'll give you a reason to stay down." A crowd had gathered, festival goers drawn by the commotion. Among them, Tessa spotted Judge Parker, watching the scene with a frown. "Jake, please," she whispered urgently. "It's not worth it, let's just go." For a moment she thought he wouldn't listen. Then Jake stepped back, offering her his arm with exaggerated courtesy. "You're right, he's not worth it." Loudly enough for the crowd to hear, he added, "My apologies for the disturbance, folks. Some men can't handle their liquor." As they walked away, Tessa could feel curious eyes following them. Timothy, who had been watching a puppet show nearby with other children, ran to meet them, oblivious to the tension. "Did you see the puppets, Ma, Pa?" he asked excitedly. "They were fighting a dragon." "That sounds exciting," Tessa managed, forcing a smile for her son's benefit. "Are you getting hungry? Should we find something else to eat?" Timothy nodded eagerly, and they made their way to a food stand, putting distance between themselves and the scene of the altercation. Jake was silent, his jaw clenched tightly, anger still radiating from him. Once Timothy was happily eating a piece of pie, Tessa turned to Jake. "You shouldn't have hit him." "He insulted you," Jake replied tersely. "No man speaks to my wife that way." "But what he said," Tessa began, "was cruel and untrue," Jake cut her off. "Yes, we married quickly. Yes, part of the reason was to keep Timothy with you, but that doesn't make our marriage any less valid or your motives any less honorable." His voice softened. "Tessa, you did what any good mother would do to protect her child. There's no shame in that." Tears pricked at Tessa's eyes. "But people will talk. They'll say exactly what Collins did, that I trapped you or used you." Jake reached for her hand, holding it firmly. "Let them talk, we know the truth, and the truth is I'm the lucky one in this marriage." Tessa blinked back tears, touched by his staunch defense. "I don't know what I did to deserve you, Jake Jackson." "You existed," he said simply. "That was enough." The intensity in his eyes made Tessa's breath catch. For the first time since their wedding, She found herself genuinely wanting to kiss her husband not out of obligation or gratitude, but because of the man he was proving himself to be. Before she could act on the impulse, Timothy finished his pie and demanded their attention, the moment passing like a summer cloud. But something had shifted between them, a new awareness that lingered as they completed their errands in town and headed home as the sun began to set. That night, after Timothy was asleep, Jake and Tessa sat on the front porch swing, watching fireflies dance in the gathering darkness. The events of the day had left a contemplative mood between them. "I'm sorry if I embarrassed you today," Jake said eventually. "Hitting Collins like that. It wasn't very civilized." Tessa smiled in the darkness. "Actually, it was rather gallant. No one's ever defended my honor before." "I do a lot more than that to protect you and Timothy," Jake admitted. "You've become very important to me, Tessa." The simple statement held volumes of meaning. Tessa turned to face him, gathering her courage. "You've become important to me too, Jake, more than I expected when I agreed to this marriage." Jake's hand found hers in the darkness, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said about trying to make this a real marriage. I want you to know I'm willing to wait as long as you need. There's no rush, Tessa." "I know," she whispered, "and I appreciate that, but I'm beginning to think I don't want to wait much longer." The sharp intake of Jake's breath was the only indication he gave of his surprise. "Tessa, are you sure? I don't want you to feel pressured because of today." "I'm not," she assured him. "This has been building for weeks, Jake. You must have felt it too." "I have," he acknowledged, his voice husky. "But I needed to be sure you felt the same way." In answer, Tessa leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, a tentative kiss that quickly deepened as Jake responded. His arms came around her, pulling her closer, and Tessa felt herself melting into his embrace, all doubts dissolving in the rightness of the moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing more rapidly, Jake rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the day I married you." Tessa laughed softly. "You had your chance. It's customary to kiss the bride, you know." "I didn't want our first kiss to be for show," Jake explained. "I wanted it to be real, like this." He kissed her again, more thoroughly this time, and Tessa knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right decision. This marriage, begun in desperate circumstances, had grown into something genuine and precious. Later that night, when they retired to what was now truly their shared bedroom, Tessa discovered that Jake was as gentle and considerate a lover as he was a husband. Their coming together felt like the natural conclusion to the journey they had begun that day in Delta, when a desperate mother and a lonely cowboy had taken a chance on each other. Afterward, lying in the circle of Jake's arms, Tessa felt a peace she hadn't known in years. "I think I'm falling in love with you, Jake Jackson," she confessed into the darkness. Jake's arms tightened around her. "I know I've already fallen in love with you, Tessa Jackson. I think I started falling the moment I saw you and Timothy at the town well." "Really?" Tessa propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "That's why you offered to marry me, not just because you felt sorry for us." "I wanted to help you because I admired your courage," Jake explained. "But I proposed marriage because I couldn't bear the thought of not seeing you again." It was impulsive and probably foolish, but I've never regretted it for a moment. Tessa laid her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Neither have I, not even when Collins was making those accusations." Jake's hand stroked her hair soothingly. "People like Collins don't matter. All that matters is what's between us and what we're building together." "And what are we building, Jake?" "A family," he answered without hesitation. "A home. A future." The simple words held all the promise Tessa could ask for. Whatever challenges lay ahead, and frontier life would surely bring many, they would face them together, as husband and wife, as parents to Timothy, as partners in every sense of the word. Summer gave way to autumn, and the Jackson Ranch thrived under its master and mistress's care. Tessa's garden yielded a bountiful harvest that she preserved for winter, while Jake's cattle fetched good prices at market. Timothy started attending the small school in Delta, riding in with Jake 3 days a week and proudly telling everyone about my pa's ranch. Tessa found herself welcomed into Delta's social circles, the circumstances of her marriage forgotten or overlooked as she became known for her kind heart and willing hands at church socials and town events. Even Mrs. Collins, the wife of the man Jake had struck, eventually became friendly, confiding that her husband had it coming and apologizing for his behavior. As winter approached, bringing with it the prospect of long evenings by the fire and perhaps snowbound days with just family for company, Tessa realized she had one more piece of news to share with her husband. She waited until Timothy was asleep, curled beside Jake on the sofa as he read aloud from a book of poetry they both enjoyed. When he finished the poem, she took the book gently from his hands and set it aside. "Jake, I have something to tell you." His expression turned concerned. "Is everything all right?" Tessa smiled, taking his hand and placing it over her still flat stomach. "Everything is perfect. We're going to have a baby, Jake, next summer if the doctor's calculations are right." Jake's face transformed with wonder and joy. "A baby, you're sure, doctor?" "Miller confirmed it yesterday when I went into town with Mrs. Ramirez. I'm about 2 months along." Jake gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of the most precious porcelain. "Tessa, this is wonderful news, a baby of our own." "Timothy's excited too," Tessa confided. "I told him this afternoon. He wants a brother but says he'll accept a sister if he must." Jake laughed, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Either would be perfect, just like their mother." As he kissed her, Tessa reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in just a few short months. From the brink of losing her son to the joy of expecting another child, from desperate poverty to comfortable security, from loneliness to love all because a kind-hearted cowboy had offered marriage to a woman in need. "I love you, Jake Jackson," she whispered against his lips, "with all my heart." "And I love you, Tessa Jackson," he replied. "Now and always." Outside, the first snowflakes of winter began to fall, coating the ranch in a blanket of pristine white. But inside the Jackson home, warmth and love prevailed, a beacon against the coming cold, a promise kept and a future secured. 7 months later, as summer bloomed across the Colorado prairie, Tessa gave birth to twins, a boy they named James, after Jake's grandfather, and a girl called Sarah, after Tessa's mother. Timothy, now 5 and fiercely protective of his younger siblings, appointed himself their guardian and teacher, solemnly explaining ranch life to the infants who could not yet understand. Jake proved to be as devoted a father to the twins as he had been to Timothy, spending hours walking the floors with fussy babies so Tessa could rest, changing diapers without complaint, and singing lullabies in a rich baritone that never failed to soothe the children to sleep. On the first anniversary of their wedding, Jake presented Tessa with a silver locket containing miniature portraits of their children Timothy, James, and Sarah. Engraved on the back were the words, "For the love that saved us both." "It's beautiful," Tessa said, tears filling her eyes as he fastened it around her neck. "Not as beautiful as you," Jake replied, pulling her into his arms. "Have I told you today how grateful I am that you said yes to a stranger's proposal?" "Only twice," Tessa teased, leaning into his embrace. "But you can tell me again if you like." "I will," Jake promised, "every day for the rest of our lives." And he did. Through the years that followed, as their children grew and their ranch prospered, as Delta changed from frontier town to established community, as their hair grayed and their faces lined with the passage of time. Through it all, they remained steadfast in their love for each other, and for the family they had built together, the cowboy who had married a desperate widow, and the woman who had taken a leap of faith on the most important day of her life.